Sorry, I'm trying to. Isaac's doing our
Does it
taxes right now.
shine?
April 15th at 8 p.m. So
Oh, we didn't
Yeah,
do us. Oh,
I can log in and do that for you if you need.
I don't even know where any of our stuff is.
Man, I hate taxes. It has taken me like 40 adult years to get my shit together, and my best friend picks them up and does them.
I
And then
learned how to do
emails
them.
them
I can do them
sometimes.
myself now, but I have to just get all our stuff together in order to
And
do
then
them.
actually sit and do it. Yeah.
welcome to Talk Like a Mother Parenting Autism Podcast. We are Jen, Kim, Rachel, and Jamie. Take a seat at our table as we share with hope, humor, and honesty.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at Talk Like a Mother. This is our parenting autism series, and tonight we are going to be talking about fears. There's a lot of fears, I feel like, with parenting in general. When you have a child with a disability, a vulnerable child, those fears just escalate into epic proportions, I think. So we're all kind of in, little different pockets of autism here where our children's ages are different, where they land on the spectrum are a little different. So some of our fears may be different, but underlying they're all coming really from the same place, which is just worrying, for our children, basically. I was thinking about kind of taking it back to when our children were diagnosed with autism, like what's kind of the first fear you had, if you can remember back that far. I just know for me, it's like so different, the things that I was afraid of then compared to now.
I can remember the word regression really resonating with me when Celie was diagnosed. I had already probably accepted her pace and many of the facets of her ADHD. I didn't realize all of her idiosyncrasies would equate to an autism diagnosis. But when I heard regression, it kind of made concrete this thing that I had watched. And then the concept, it was like, it wasn't just that it was the criteria met by that. It was more like this is a feature and a facet of Celie's autism. And that, you'd have major skill growth and then it would be gone. And at that point, it was all of her work. She was like an overachiever at the beginning. She had a ton to talk about. She was kind of like a titler, and then it was gone. And so I thought, like, dang it, what causes it? I was just trying to wrap my head around this concept of like this immeasurable but super measurable change that it happened.
Yeah.
I think for me, I didn't know enough about autism to have that sort of forward fear, if that sort of makes sense. And I'll be honest, my only sort of fear I sat in when she was diagnosed is she was diagnosed with nonverbal autism. She didn't speak at 2.5. So I was so focused on her talking and hearing her voice
Yeah.
that I didn't really think about how hard, because I didn't understand autism at 2.5. I didn't know there'd be the safety concerns, the social issues. That I didn't know about any of that stuff because I had never met another human in my life. Well, I'm sure I'd met them, but didn't know. I didn't know autism. So I didn't know enough to have the fears, if that sort of makes sense,
No, that makes complete sense.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that like for me, that's how it was in the way that, some of those fears, like elopement, even before I knew that my son had autism, I was so afraid of. And then once autism came to mind, like you hear these horror stories of these autistic children running away and they drown or, get lost somewhere. And that was a huge fear of mine in the beginning because he would just take off all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like there's like the fears of the moment of like the age you're at or where you're at now. Elopement's in a problem, but like Jesse will threaten to elope. Like he'll like, I'm gonna run out of the house, I'm gonna do this. And it's still a fear because if he gets upset and we're near a street, he might just run into that street. That happened a few months ago. He ran into like
Mm-hmm.
a street and I was freaking out because I wasn't ready for it. And then I was like, oh, this is a thing again. And then it unlocks like that fear again. And then there's like the far away fears. And then as you grow, there's things you didn't even realize you were going to fear that you fear. Like you're like, oh, like right now, I always feared social interactions with my son, like probably almost too much that kids were going to be mean to him. And now kids are kind of mean to my son and it sucks. And
Yeah.
it's a fear of mine every day I sent him to school. Kids take advantage of him
Now,
in a
so
little
Jesse
way.
was a little bit older when he was diagnosed. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was
Like
almost
older.
5.
Yeah.
But he still, I mean, he spoke very minimally. He was still
Mhm.
considered nonverbal at that point because he barely spoke.
Well,
Um,
compared to like, I feel like at 2.5, what you're thinking about,
yeah.
like Alyssa and Kaya were 2.5. So like, you're just in a very different mind frame with
Hear
a
that.
2.5-year-old, even as opposed to a 5-year-old. You know,
Yeah.
it's just
But
it.
I distinctly remember 2.5, and that's when like the eloping and stuff was really scary because it was like he had no control over his body or what he did. Like it was like he
Mhm.
didn't have a second thought about anything he did, which is like, yeah, I could say that for a lot of 2-year-olds, but it was like
That impulse to go mixed with the curiosity is just like a curse.
mhm. Well, and
Oh,
even now, like a big fear of mine is, you know, the social aspects that because my son has been reliant on adults so much his life,
Mhm.
like Kimmy talks about like prompt dependency and stuff. Jesse has a lot of that too because he always has therapists and stuff around. He's so trusting of so many adults that
mhm.
even though like my son can speak, it would be so easy for someone to take advantage of him in certain ways. Like it scares the crap out of me and I feel like I have no control over certain things. But it's just like these new things pop up every day or like a that like thought comes in your mind and you're like, "Oh my gosh, it just unlocks all this new stuff."
It's paralyzing when those thoughts pop through your head.
So
All
I feel like when Alyssa was diagnosed, the word autism was the most scary thing to me in that moment because we didn't have a lot of information on autism. I know people like to fight over awareness and acceptance now, but we weren't even close to even awareness at that time. Like I knew nobody with autism, like Jenn, kind of like you said. I didn't even know anybody with special needs really. Like, yeah, I've obviously seen them out in public and at school and stuff like that, but personally, we didn't know anybody who had a child with special needs. Nobody in the family had autism. I mean, now we see the neurodiversity and neurodivergent runs lines kind of through everybody that is in the family, but that wasn't like what autism was known at the time. Like the people that worked with her all insisted that she had sensory integration, which is now known as sensory processing disorder, which like made a lot of sense to the struggles that she had. So that's kind of what I grasped onto. And obviously she had turned 2 in April. She was diagnosed in July. She was nonverbal, but like nonverbal is just a funny word for a kid who's just over 2. I mean, I run a daycare. We have 2-year-olds that don't talk and they talk and they're fine. You know what I mean? Like they might not be talking at 2, but then 2.5 rolls around and all of a sudden it's like, you're like, where did these words come from? You know? So you're kind of nervous about her not talking, but like she's still so little at that point. Like in my mind, at least, I'm like, not to the point where I'm like, oh, she's never going to talk. I can't even grasp that at this point, you know? Hearing the word autism was just such a shock to me. And from what I had read and looked up about autism was so dark and so
mm-hmm.
drastic that I could not associate that with my little girl. Like I could not wrap my head around that. Like this is what you're saying she is. And I know according to today's standards, this probably doesn't sound great, but we didn't have social media. We didn't have people showing their children. You didn't have this array of like, this is my child with autism. This is my child with autism, and seeing all the pockets that all the different people fit into. Like basically what was known was basically they're in their own world. They're probably not going to talk. They're probably not going to be potty trained. That was just like such a scary thought to even think about. All these other things that like I'm now afraid of weren't even like, you know, on my radar. And of course she was 2.5 and she did kind of run and stuff then, but like she was never out of my thing. Like she was in the house, she was with us. 2.5, you can kind of keep a handle on them. It's when they're doing that at 4.5
Yeah.
faster, you know, that in they're smarter and they're doing it and you're like, shoot, you know.
Oh my gosh,
Um
when Jesse was like 5 one time, I had to chase after him like a half a mile and I was like, I've got to get in shape. Like that's when he realized that too.
Face the music. Yeah.
well, it's funny, Jaime, because like we dealt with this for a long time, but there was never a word for it. Like it wasn't like
Yeah.
a thing that I
Hmm.
went to the doctors was like, oh, she does this. It was just a thing that like we kind of dealt with, and it kind of went under like the umbrella of like her not having safety awareness. And then as she got older and social media and all that and autism groups and everything kind of came about, and I'm like, and then go, what the hell is elopement? Like, what are they talking about? Because
Yeah. And
it was
still, if
such
you
like a
say it to like an average person, like, oh,
yeah,
he elopes, they'll be like, he gets married. Like,
Yeah.
literally. And then finally I'm like, oh yeah, she did that. Yeah, like it's like
That's
I
why
kept
I
seeing
love
it and
going.
not understanding, you know.
I love going to the doctors or hearing when the shitty news comes in from the assessments and stuff, because then you get language for the stuff that you've been tripping over. Like I'm like, she darts everywhere. And you just feel so silly saying stuff like that. And then you're like, oh, there's this word called elopement that describes exactly how terrifying this is, or whatever. Like, you learn so many facets at those moments where you meet somebody that knows better than you do.
Yeah. And obviously it changes, like Jaime says, the more you get into autism and the more your child changes and different things come up, your worries kind of and fears kind of change. Sometimes they kind of take a life of their own. Like, I think all of our kids, no matter where they're falling on the spectrum, have this layer of vulnerability that just makes things really scary. And that means something different, I'm sure, to each one of us. But, I think that's one of the things that are really hard. And I think it's hard for people outside to really understand how vulnerable our children are, because even with Alyssa, people look at her, they don't see it. Like, they don't see, it's almost like I obsess over something that I don't need to obsess over. They don't see how vulnerable she is because she doesn't look vulnerable and she doesn't necessarily appear vulnerable, but like, she's so vulnerable,
I think part
anyone
of that
else?
too is like the social media thing, which I think is a good thing because it makes us more aware, but it also like causes more fears because we hear more about things that happen to kids like ours. I was not aware of the amount of like things that happen to children in special education classrooms until I got into like our bubble of community, because you hear about that stuff sometimes on the news, but really you hear about it all from like each other or like posts because we all follow people in this realm, and you're like, it scares the crap out of you. Like,
You realize there's so much that doesn't make the news.
yes. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, not even that was just like an example because that does pop up a lot, is like children. Just the other day here in my state, a bus aide had been hitting these kids and getting away with it because no one knows. And so it's like, it's hard because it makes you like mistrust people, but you kind of have to trust people and all this stuff. And so it just sucks because it just opens up all these new fears. You're like,
I
I didn't
mean,
think about that. Like,
probably a conversation for another episode, but I firmly believe for vulnerable kids like ours that cannot communicate, it should be mandatory cameras in those areas. End of discussion. You don't want a camera on you all day, then don't get into that profession, because
And the way to access that footage needs to be clear, because there have been plenty of cameras in the spaces that Sealy has been when incidents have occurred. And I cannot write the letter in the way that gets the freaking tape released.
yeah,
It doesn't, it's like it's for their management of their team alone.
Yeah.
It's not.
And that's how it is at the daycare. We have cameras, but the parents aren't allowed access to them.
Then
and
tell me
you have
as
to
a
like, you would have
parent,
to go all the way to court or something to get,
then
or
tell me
something.
as a parent how I get to you to review the tapes and
You
like give me
can't
a
though,
report
because
back.
like for a daycare, it's different, but that's going against the privacy of the other children. If there is a special needs child in that class, then
Yeah.
that parent is seeing what that child's doing, and that kind of like goes against that child's privacy. So like,
Yes.
school's different, obviously, but I'm just saying like but if there's no cameras, there's no nothing. There's nobody that is able to view them. Like, I view our cameras, the owner views them. If there was an investigation, the state could ask to view them. So like, I'm sure
It can
people
go
are able
deeper.
to view
Yeah.
them, but yeah.
And I'm not
I know.
suggesting, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there's like this bus company database that I can look up and like tap in our
Yeah.
student number.
Well,
But
no, it is. It's just there's so many sides to it, and like you said, it's so hard to get teachers for our children as it is. If parents were able to view cameras, you'd have half that amount. Not because people are doing wrong, but so many things can be misinterpreted when somebody else is viewing a camera. So like, that would be probably really
When we
hard, I
have
think.
our center, all the parents can just sign a thing giving permission that any other parent can look at.
Exactly.
And I know this is also off the subject, but
oh, I see what you mean about seeing
thought-
other kids. I was looking, I see what you mean.
it's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
HIPAA, but it's not that
Yeah,
word, right?
yeah, it's something else. But like, it's also, we need to pay these people more money because
Hello?
people
Yeah,
are getting
absolutely.
hired who shouldn't be hired for these positions because
Mhm.
And then there's shit for training.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's fear number 2. I will say,
Absolutely.
like, it's such a good thought that these fears like reveal themselves as we
Mhm.
navigate each chapter of life. But in the same way as mental health, our recent series on mental health, it's like there are so many layers and facets to the things that I'm terrified about. I'm scared that my kid is going to take off her shoes, get a wood chip, and put on her sock askew, and then beat everybody up for the rest of the day about it. Like, I'm scared that if somebody calls the cops because it happens on the side of the road, that she's going to get tased. I'm scared that I'm not going to handle it properly when blah, blah, blah. Like there's just a million things that you can be afraid of at every second. And then you have to manage how you're going to make it through that. I mean, it's too much.
Yeah, I think so. One of my biggest fears really does go around how vulnerable she is. And like we had an incident that I've talked about before where she got left on a bus and she didn't get dropped off at school and the driver kept her on the bus, not purposely. I don't think he realized that she was still on the bus because Alyssa's prompt dependent. So you have to say, okay, get off the bus. Like you have to actually tell her her regular van driver was sick, so he wasn't in, so there was a substitute. Went from my town to the next town to pick up another child who was minimally verbal, and that child typically rides the van alone. So there was no conversation going on. And then drove like 5 towns south where they dropped this child off. And then that's finally when they realized Alyssa was in the van. And in my head, I'm like, I just have this thing where I know that the person getting that child off the van goes, oh my gosh, who's your friend here today? And the van driver goes, shit. If that wasn't said, would he have parked the van in the van lot and left her there?
Or what if
Like,
she had followed George out of the goddamn van and gotten out at the wrong school? Then
what
who
if she
is
didn't
there?
follow George out of the van and she froze to death because it was December?
Yeah.
And nobody would have known she was missing until she didn't come home from school at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know what
I
I
mean, I
mean?
think
Like it's just, and because she doesn't have the ability to speak for herself and she's prompt dependent. So I don't think she would get out of the van, even if she was cold. I don't think, even if it was unlocked. And even like you said, Rachel, what if she did get out of the van? Now she's in this isolated van lot. I mean, it's just, to me, I'm like, how could this happen to my child? Yes, you see it
Mhm.
happening to all the time, right? But like you never really think it's going to happen to your child, and then it happens and it's like, how could this happen? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously they didn't do their job. They're supposed to check at every stop. That obviously wasn't done.
I'm sure you got to the point where you started trusting her regular driver and you're like, oh, these people know her, but you have no control that that driver was gone that day and no
Yeah.
one's going to say, hey, there's a substitute. And, like it's just that stuff like, yeah, people tell you, oh, you can trust us. We know your son, blah, blah, blah. But then, okay, what if you get sick? Or what, it just,
Yeah,
you feel so out of control. Those little minor things that seem like nothing to other people. It's like, that's a huge deal. This guy doesn't know my daughter's prop dependent. And also he's a dummy who didn't do his job.
exactly. And we've had incidents where she's gotten see, things just change when you get into adult services, and there's not the same standard of care. It's just not there.
Mhm.
And then with COVID, I mean, everything, the staffing is so messed up. She was on two different companies were transporting her, which is like not ideal because she appears to be more, for lack of better term, functioning than she is. Like she doesn't understand everything you're saying, but she acts like she does. She'll just say,
She's
yeah,
so agreeable.
yeah. And she doesn't,
Yeah.
she's not yelling, she's not stimming like crazy. Like she's pretty calm, she's pretty happy. So it's like they're not really seeing the level that's
But for
there.
all of
There's
our kids, in the very same way, Kim, like, and also different, but for all of our kids, if you were to say, hey, Celie, is this your stop? Yes or no? She'd say yes. If you said, is this your stop? No or yes, she'd say no. Whether it was our house, whether it wasn't, whether it's Henry's house, whether she's on the wrong bus, whether it's not even a bus. It's about phrasing, it's about knowing her. And if you just ask questions and accept the answers, you could leave my kid at Grand Central Station.
I had the
They're
guy,
not
he
reading
literally said,
files.
oh, I'm so sorry. I asked her if it was okay, and she said yeah. And I'm like, she says yeah to everything,
Right.
unless she says no. You know what I mean? Like she doesn't understand what you're asking her. Like she might think you're saying, is this your house? It's just so frustrating. And honestly, like she'd probably be, we don't leave her unsupervised at all, but she'd probably be okay for 5 minutes. It's the fact that she can't speak. She doesn't know how to operate a telephone. If she got hurt, if there was a fire, like any of these things happen, like she does not know how to, like she does not have the tools that, somebody that can speak and can operate a telephone has. So it's like that stuff is taken away from her. So even in a short time, or something could just freak her out. She freaks out and she's throwing us all over the house and she's upset and nobody's here to like manage that. Like,
Yeah.
that could be a real problem. And it's like they don't necessarily see that. In their van drivers, they don't necessarily know, but it's like, again, just if you do your job and you look at the stuff you're supposed to look at, you would know. And
Yeah.
that's just like one example. I mean, there's so many other things. And I know we're all scared to leave our kids with people, even if they're not special needs. Like it's scary. But when you have a kid who can't come home and tell you anything, nothing, like all my kid can say is good. How was your day? Good. And I'll say, what did you do? And she'll tell me the food that she had for lunch, like, which is great. I mean, that's huge progress for her. But like it's not telling me anything that could happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jesse's really young, so that's also part of it, but he has words, which obviously makes it a little easier, but at the same time, he's not communicative in that way.
Right.
Or would he know what to
Especially
say?
when
So it's really
distressed.
scary. And I think also like, but when he grows up and hopefully he's able to communicate better, I'm scared of like Kimmy talking about like big moments or big things happening. Like, yeah, okay, maybe Alyssa can be home for whatever minutes for someone to come, but what if there was an emergency? And I think about stuff like that all the time. Like, okay, hopefully at Jesse's level, at some point, he'll be able to like maybe go to the store, like walk over to the store by himself. I don't know if we'll live where we live, but right now we live right next to a store. And maybe he can learn how to use a self checkout or how to check out with and then walk back home. And I just think of like these crazy scenarios that probably wouldn't happen, but it's like, what if there was a fire in the store? What if there was a shooting? His reaction level to things
Right.
would be so intense that like,
Or they wouldn't react at all.
yeah, or he
Like,
wouldn't, yeah. With school shootings, like, I mean, I've talked about a lot on here. I've been in a mass shooting. Whenever there's a drill or anything, I'm like, my kid would not, he would either not do the right thing, he would probably start laughing or running around because sometimes when he's
There's
in
no
a
be
high
quiet.
stress moment, it's like he's just laughing. He finds it funny that other people are stressing out. He would
Mhm.
be such a target. But just things like that, like, yeah, day to day, I don't have to worry about that stuff. And who knows what his future is going to be right now? I can't say, but that stuff scares me. It all scares me for the future. And then Rach talking about like police stuff. I talk about this all the time. And we had Jerry Turning on and he talked about, he has Blue Bridge and training cops and stuff. And it's really sad how like a lot of cops don't know how to work with people on the spectrum or neurodivergent people in general. And it's just like my son, I know is going to grow up and the things he does is going to be mistaken as like maybe
Yeah.
on drugs or maybe
Mhm.
he's in a situation someone's yelling at him and then he lashes out because he cannot regulate. Like that stuff scares the crap out of me so much because it's like we want to push our kids to be more independent and to do things on their own, but then like who's we protecting them? Like it's our job to protect them. So it's that pull of like you want to push them, you want them to like try new things. I want my son to go to school and work with other adults, but at the same time, the worst case scenario of all that runs in
Mhm.
my head too.
Oh,
right,
I
because
agree.
it's our kids are so vulnerable to abuse and to be taken advantage of. Like whether that's in school, whether that's in the workforce, whether that's in social situations, if they're able to do that, you see it all the time. People think it's funny. Sometimes our kids aren't gonna read cues the same way. So if someone tells them to do something and they're thinking it's funny, they may go and do it. You know what I mean? They don't have that, like, I think they call that, it's like predictability or something like that, where they necessarily understand the consequence all the time. So they'll, that's why
Oh,
they're
I tell you what,
susceptible to
standing
getting,
with a group of peers, if someone told Kaya to do something, she would do it, which
yeah.
Yeah.
terrifies the crap out of me. I was real quick, I was just gonna say that, and Kimmy, you said this when we first started, that everyone's most likely their number one fear is when they're gone. It haunts me daily. It's like that fear of, I had a moment a couple weeks ago on the phone with my boss and I started crying and he's like, "Huh," and I said, everything is just so hard and she just, it's not fair because I'm like, no offense, but if you drop dead today, your kids will understand. And he said, no, you're right, they would. I said, my daughter would never understand. She would never understand where I went. She will never understand. I said, it haunts me every moment of every day. It's like it paralyzes me probably 3 times a day. I'm not excited. It haunts me. Planning for her future. Who's going to care for her when I'm gone? How much money a month is she going to
I'm like,
need to live in a
who's gonna
place
care
that
for her
isn't
while
going
I'm
to take
gone?
advantage of her?
It sounds like one question mark. Like, who's gonna care for her while I'm gone? But really, it's years and years and years and years
Yes. Yes.
of a team that shows up Sunday through Sunday, trust every single
Yes.
step of the way, and I'm gone to, and who's managing that? I mean, it's all of it.
The very first actually guest piece I ever wrote for Kate, I said, I'm not saving for her college or a new car. I'm saving for a group home where where she will have to live when I die. It's just
And
not
I'm
the same.
trying to write a document that says these fruit pouches, idiot.
Yeah. Like how she's not gonna eat it as she would never. I mean, no one would ever understand how to feed her. Nobody would understand how to feed her. They
Yeah.
wouldn't cut her eggs right. Like it's just all of these things that, like Jaime said, you want to push them past kind of all of those things because to prepare them for that. But like it's hard. It's just a, and I also think our kids, and Kimmy, maybe I'm wrong. Jaime, you both have other children, but I do feel like, and again, I don't have another child, so maybe I'm totally stepping out of bounds here, but I do feel like there's a different bond, not a better, not a stronger bond. I don't mean it like that, but there's a different bond, I think, between a mom and their special needs child. Because, like, Kimmy, God forbid anything happened to you. Like, I'm just, Kira and Lexi would be able to survive without you, like day to day stuff, where I don't
Kim's
say
like, they better
girl.
not.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Kimmy's
well,
like,
I don't
the
know.
hell they
And
will,
nobody would ever
little
go to the
bitches.
doctors again. Nobody would ever go to the doctors again, but
You know what I mean, though? Like the
Yeah.
understanding with them is there. It wouldn't be with her, right?
Yes.
So it's that difference. I don't know if that.
although once you're out, you're out. So if I die, I better not come back.
Well, and it's like Kimmy is Alyssa's voice. Like that's
Mhm.
who she is.
And I'm
And
her
so,
comfort, like there's
yeah.
lots of people in this house that love her, that care for her. Her father is an amazing father, but like I'm her comfort.
Yeah.
I think sometimes he's her safety, but it's not. She looks at me for comfort. She looks to me to make things better. Like
And to regulate,
it's
help her
just,
regulate.
Yep. And you
it's
can read
just that,
her so well.
and I'm in tune with her in a way that like nobody else is. And obviously, if I wasn't here, I'm very fortunate that she has 3 siblings. She has her father. She has aunts. If something happened, like not when I'm 90, because then like everybody's gonna be dead. So I don't know what's gonna happen then. But if it were to happen sooner than expected, like, well, my sister will always say, well, I would take her. I would never let anything happen to her if like for some reason the kids couldn't take her. But I'm like, you'll be in the nursing home next to me. What do you mean? Like, it's not,
We're
that's not,
together.
yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, I try not to obsess over it. It is, of course, it's a huge fear of mine. And then I get into my things where I'm like, is it unfair to expect these kids to take over where we leave off? Like, is that, I don't want to say a burden. I don't feel like she's a burden, but like, is that unfair for them to have to like pick up where we leave off? And when she was younger, it was just like too effing bad. Like,
But now, as everybody's building families or ideas of
well,
that,
yeah, and it's like,
different.
is she gonna meet some unexpected challenges as she ages? Like, I never really thought about it like that. Like, if she has some kind of health conditions, I mean, it's gonna be really difficult to manage if she has a health condition because she can't communicate. Like, is that gonna be a lot to put on somebody who's like raising young kids? It's just really, I'm grateful that we have that because no matter what, I know that they're gonna look after her no matter what. But it's just really like hard to think about. It's really, I try not to obsess about it. Like I think about it, I get overwhelmed about it, and I try to kind of move on and put it aside because there's nothing I can do about it now. Like there's nothing that can be done now. Like I'm not sending her. I mean, the only option that some people suggest is to get them into a group home where they're there during the day. And then if something happens to you, they can stay there. But like, I'm not on board with that idea. That's not going to work for me. That's not going to work for her. In theory, it's not a bad idea, but like, I can't do that.
The rates of like abuse that happen in group homes and stuff are so like sadly horrifically high. And
Well, and with a girl,
most our
I
kids are
feel
gonna
like
end up.
it's even more. And then with someone who doesn't speak, like she couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I couldn't do it. Like I just couldn't do it. Like I just couldn't do it.
yeah.
Well,
I
when I
mean,
was having my little meltdown about the future and how hard things were, I said to Doug, I said, people just take things for granted. I'm like, she can't even cross the street safely. And this is when she was 13 and she wasn't quite 4. I'm like, these are just things that nobody else thinks about. And I said, I wouldn't have thought about them either. In fairness, I wouldn't have thought about 13-year-old crossing the street. I'm like, I still do her self-care of her body. Like, I still wash under her
yeah.
arms. I wash her butt. I wash her hair.
Well,
I brush her
Jenn,
hair.
it's funny that you say that crossing the street because obviously for years and years, Alyssa did not have safety awareness. She could not
Yeah.
be in a parking lot or anywhere near any cars where you weren't like holding her hand like tightly. And I wouldn't even go certain places like new places without Neil. Just it's too much of a safety risk. As she's gotten older, I noticed like she doesn't like to hold my hand anymore. I don't know when
She's
it
my
happened.
mom.
Like it just happened over the past couple of
Mhm.
years. She'll still hold Neil's hand, which is funny. But she will hold my hand. Like I still hold her hand. She knows now. If she hears a car, she'll pull back. She stops. It's not to the point that I'm 100% like I'm not gonna just let her go off and walk on her own. But like if I'm walking next to her, like I notice that when a car comes, she'll stop. She still lets me hold her hand across the street, but the second we get to the other side, she lets go.
I
Yeah.
But like
She's like,
even things
I
like
got
opening
this.
the door. Like if somebody came to the door, my daughter would open it. She
Yeah.
wouldn't think to be like, Mom,
Naked or not at my
yeah,
house.
naked or not, she's
Naked or
opening that
not.
door. And probably naked, just to be clear. Like,
Mhm.
it's those kind of things that it's like we were talking about it at dinner the other night with some girlfriends, and like they've got kids the same age, and 13 and 14 are their children, and they can run to the store now, and they can leave them after school. And now, and I leave Kaya? Sure, she would sit in her room on her iPad and not probably even give two bleeps where I am until she would need something.
Until she needed a sip of water.
Right, sip of water. But here's the worrisome. Let's say I ran to and I think actually, Rachel, you and I were talking about this. But like,
Girl,
what if I got in a car accident?
what if
Somebody
you
got,
get in a wreck? And
yeah,
not
like what
because
if
it's
something
your
happened to
fault.
me,
What if
like, and
some
I'm
asshole
out,
hits you?
right?
Yeah.
And she's
Or
in
you're
this house by
or
herself.
a flat tire. Like anything can
Right.
happen.
She
Yeah.
wouldn't know to call somebody, or do you know what I mean? So it's like all of these things that, again, I wouldn't have thought about if I didn't have a daughter with autism.
I was thinking about that recently. Like, what if, because I'm home with the kids a lot, home alone. I'm like, what if something happened to me? Like, I've talked to my 5-year-old and like my nephew who's here a lot with us. And I'm like, okay, this is how you call the emergency thing on a cell phone. Because like we all learned 911. Now it's like a button on our phones, it's like different. But like with Jesse, like Jesse learned my phone number and stuff in therapy and stuff like that. And he could like memorize it, but he couldn't like, he doesn't remember it now because it was just like the motions of doing it. But he can't apply that to a phone as much as they tried to teach him. Like he doesn't understand those concepts necessarily. And he doesn't know how to talk on a phone. Like even on FaceTime and stuff, he doesn't really fully understand that he's talking to people all the time, besides like, hi. So I'm like, what if I passed out and it was just me and him at home? Like he would have no clue what to do. And
We
or
taught
he might not
C how
notice.
to use we taught C how to say the Alexa. I whisper because I don't want her to call 911. But you can set your contacts in like a Google or like a word or whatever and enable it to make calls because it has to be hooked to the Wi-Fi anyhow.
I don't
Then
think
it's
he would
like,
know to do
call
that even.
dad, call dad. Hey, A word, call dad. I'm like, oh my God.
You know what's interesting is she'll call me, like she has an iPhone and she has 1,000 iPads. She'll FaceTime me from her iPad to come wipe her butt in the bathroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, but she won't call me from her cell phone. But she'll call me audio on her iPad, not
Yeah.
her cell phone.
So
But
That I
that
pay
Jesse's not, and I
$39.99 a month for, by the way. Okay.
think
Or
Jesse
every-
would probably get to that point, but he has no interest in communicating with other people. Like he wouldn't come up and talk to me unless he needed something.
He'd
He
probably
wouldn't
be
be like,
annoyed that you couldn't help him with whatever he needed help with.
exactly. He'd
Alyssa be
like,
pissed that I'm laying on the floor. Like, why?
Yeah.
You don't belong
Get
here.
up,
Get up.
bitch.
Jesse would take my phone and start playing Roblox on it. This is what
For real.
he'd be like,
Have you seen that
woohoo!
meme that says, I
He'd
know
be
how
like,
I'm gonna go? My
putting it in
kid's
front of your
gonna
face. Face
unplug my
ID.
life support to plug in charge their iPhone, charge
Oh
their
my
phone.
God.
Like, that's how we're all gonna go out. Every one of us
Yeah.
are gonna go out.
But
But
let's
he
just
wouldn't
say,
even like he has no desire to call even like his
Right.
favorite cousin who he loves. He doesn't care about like communication. And I'm sure maybe this will change, but I just the other day I was like, I would die. Like if something happened, I hit my head and like I needed emergency services right away.
Done.
I'm like, I need a life alert.
I mean, this would
But
happen
you
with
know
my
what's
I
teens,
wear
my
an
adult
Apple
children.
Watch
I
about
do
it.
have my one watch. I don't know where it is.
Because unless they needed something from me, they just stay in their room. So
Yeah.
All the kids are just gonna let us.
we just
They'll
have no
find you at
freaking.
dinner.
Neil was making a joke today because I fell. I had a kind of a bad fall yesterday in my room, and he's like, "Oh, don't." I go, "Imagine if I like broke my neck. Wouldn't that be crazy?" And I have a wild imagination. He goes, "No, I'm gonna snap that shit back on. Don't worry." He's like, "I'd have you on life support," and he's like, "Yeah, but Alyssa probably wouldn't like it plugged in, so she'd probably be
The beeping would really piss her off.
yeah."
Yeah.
She'd be
Can we
like,
mute this
"This
lady?
does
She
not belong
flatlined
here."
at noon.
Another worry that I really have a lot is like medical worries, especially as she's getting older. They become more, real. I worry about her, if there was something medically going on with her and she can't tell us. And I know that people would say, oh, you'd be able to tell, but like, I don't
No.
know, her
Mm-mm.
pain perceptors are different. I have stuff that's wrong with me all the time and I just ignore it. Like, I don't know, like, if she
See,
needed her
Kimmy,
gallbladder out or needed, I don't know if there was something going
you,
on. And like,
yeah.
she had this couple weeks where she was just having meltdown after meltdown. And I'm thinking, what if there's something wrong? What if there's something really wrong? And this is how she's expressing it. And we're like just thinking she's acting up. And it came that down to that. I think that she was just very anxious about all the talking stuff about the wedding because after that passed, she kind of went back to normal. But like, I started thinking, like, what if there's something you don't, you can't see the inside of her body? Like, I don't know. She doesn't get pap smears. Like, she doesn't, she gets a minimal checkups. They don't do blood work on her. You have to sedate her to get blood work. So it's like, unless they had a real concern, they're not going to do that. Like, it's just, it's so scary. It's so scary to me that like something could happen or be going on with her body and it won't be caught because you can't tell us. Like,
Well, that's the other
that's
thing, Kimmy, is
terrifying to me.
people always, well, and people say this, and I could be wrong, but people always say, oh, our kids have high pain tolerances. I don't think it's that they have high pain tolerances. They can't communicate the pain. So I know for Kaya, now she might be able to say, like, my head hurts, but before it would be a behavior.
Yeah.
There would be these sudden behaviors, and I'm like, okay,
Well,
now what?
and what if she was dizzy?
Teeth,
Like,
is it
how
her
could she
head?
communicate that she's dizzy? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's
Yeah.
not gonna, I don't think she'd really be able to find a way to communicate that. If like her stomach hurts, she'll push on her stomach, but like,
Mhm.
also that can mean anything, and we just go through the things like, oh, is she bloated? Is she constipated? We try to like manage the things we can manage. And sometimes a placebo effect, if she gets medicine, she'll feel like she's better. But it's like, I don't know, there's all these things that could happen that like she wouldn't really be able to
Tell you, yeah.
describe that. Like, it's just, if there was something wrong, it would probably get missed or it probably would take it to be really escalated before we would really know. And that's terrifying. And the doctor's not going to just like run scans and do all the stuff like just because you like think maybe something's wrong. Like with her, she has to be freaking sedated. They have to put her out. Like they can't just like run her into a CAT scan. Like she's going to be
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Well,
you
that's what I was
know.
gonna say. Like, even in general, like obviously that stuff is like the scariest, that something's majorly wrong and your kid doesn't tell you, because Jesse doesn't tell us. Like, if he's gonna throw up, he just throws up suddenly. Like, he's
Mhm.
not like, oh, my stomach feels weird or my, anything like that. But even just like general medical things, like I was gonna say that, like if Jesse needed a CAT scan, then it's like, how would I get this kid to hold still for a CAT scan? And then it's like putting him under. How would I get him to get a IV, like to be put under? Like right now, so with my daughter's blood disease, we've recently found out that through genetic testing that she basically has two types of the same blood disease. And anyway, they want to test her whole family because this is like insanely rare. And so it's likely that one type came from me, one type came from my husband, or we're carriers, blah, blah, blah. So they're testing us all and they want to test Jesse. And all I can think is like, what if he has this? And then they're going to want to do blood draws on him. I couldn't even imagine, you couldn't pay me $1 million to imagine this kid freely doing a blood draw. Like, even the testing they're doing, it luckily is a swab, but like if he tests on and they're gonna want to do like medical interventions all the time, I'm like,
Digging deeper. Yeah.
I could, like, if he needs like the medication that has to be a shot and all this stuff like pretty regularly, I'm like, I
It
can't,
makes it feel almost impossible.
yeah,
Like
and like
almost
everything. And
impossible.
it's like he did have to get an x-ray when he broke his arm, but even that I remember being like, how, and he did it. And so our kids always surprise us, but it's even like those little things, like if he has to get a filling, I feel like it's the end of the world. Like, it's just like
Well,
there's
and the
big
thing with
fears, and then there's
Alyssa
like these
is
little things that like, how are we gonna even do this ever?
if she
Mhm.
has to get a filling, which she hasn't gotten one yet, but like at some point we're gonna have to do a really big dental visit. She's gonna have to be put under. That's
Mhm.
terrifying. Like not sedated, put under anesthesia in order to get cavities. It
So
seems
they did that with
ridiculous.
Kaya. She had to when she had two cavities. He said the cavities were so deep. He's like, I don't know how that kid's walking around. And again, there was no, hey, my teeth hurt.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I felt so bad. But Kimmy, they had a sedator. They did the gas mask first, and then they did the whole Reddit because otherwise he would never be able
I
to
know,
do it.
right? It's just so scary. The same thing, like eventually she's gonna eventually have to get a pap smear.
Yeah. Well, they
I
had to
mean, that's
sedate
just
Kaya for her MRI. They tried it without, and like Jamie was saying, she did not
they
hold
also
still
had
for an
us
MRI.
they had to sedate Alyssa for her MRI as well. So when she first started having seizures, they, The first time she had one, it was a pretty big one. And they brought her to the hospital and they wanted to do a CAT scan and they had to give her two different sedation medications. And it didn't fully sedate her, even, but it sedated her enough that she was weak enough that they could get her on the thing to get her in the CAT scan. I mean, they had to wrap her. They wrapped her in sheets. She couldn't they had her somewhat
Like
restrained.
swaddled almost.
Yes, and then also they gave her Versed, which is like a medicine they typically give you through an IV, like if you were going to get a procedure like a colonoscopy or your tubes had something where they would kind of you'd kind of get sleepy so you weren't awake for the procedure, but it doesn't like put you out. But she had to drink it because again, you're not getting an IV in her arm. And then they gave her Ativan. And the next time they wanted her to get a blood draw in order to change her medication, they end up putting her on the generic version. Or CVS never had the generic version, so she always had the brand name medication for her seizure medicine. And then for some reason they had the generic. And then I'm like, I don't know, she's never had this. They're like, it's the same thing. And then 4 weeks later, she had a seizure after not having one for 2 years. So it's not the same thing. But in order for the neurologist to change the medication to brand name only, they had to do blood work. In order to give her blood work, you have to sedate her. In order to sedate her, you have to go to the ER, be admitted, and have everybody look at you like you're batshit crazy. Oh, what are you here for?
Which
Oh,
is a
she's here for
process
blood
of
work.
13 uninformed people to get to the one where
She's
they're
here for
expecting
blood work. So our local hospital has basically like a children's department and a regular department. So the children's department, there's some doctors that are affiliated with Children's Hospital in Boston. So because of that, and her pediatrician was affiliated with Children's, we were able to do it. Like I don't think somebody can just typically walk into the ER and be like, "Hey, sedate my kid and take her blood." But it was ordered, and everybody, they got her into the children's pot, and they're like, "Wait, why are you here again?" And we're like in the hallway, and I'm like, "We're here to get her blood taken. She needs to be sedated." And they're looking at me, they're looking at her, they're looking at each other. I mean, literally, I'm not even kidding. It could be a movie how dramatic it is sounding. That's literally how dramatic it was. And then they brought her in the room and they were like, "Okay, so we're gonna give her Ativan, right? Let's get her an IV." And I was like, "Oh no, you're not gonna get an IV in her, ma'am. And the Ativan needs to be oral, and you need to. It's not even like you're like, here, take this Ativan, and she's like, sure. Like you've got to work to get that in her. And then two of the security guards went to go into the room to hold her down, and Neil was like, absolutely not. Don't even touch her. We will leave right now. First of all, you couldn't be strong enough to hold this bitch down. I'm not even kidding. You couldn't even hold. Took 5 people to hold her down when she was 5 years old. Never mind when this. I think she was like 18 at this time. It's like you're not gonna hold her down to the level that you need to get an IV in her. It's never gonna happen. Like she'll rip that shit out so fast. And finally, somebody came over and I was like, "Can you look at the records from last time? See what they gave her. See what the milligrams is, and that's we need to do the exact same thing." Once we got her in the room, the nurses were awesome. Like they were so good with her. It worked out and they got the blood, but she heard that heart coming, that and her eyes would pop open. Like this is heavy duty medicine they're giving. Like this is like medicine that they give you to do a procedure on your body that you stay asleep for. And they can't even get a cot into the room without her eyes popping open. Like she's like, hell no. But she was again weak enough and they were made her comfortable enough that they were able to get the blood draw because she was kind of squirming but not fully able to do it. This is just to get blood. I can't imagine what would happen if she had to be hospitalized. I was
Well, I worry
terrified
about
during
that
COVID.
too.
Terrified.
That's another big fear of mine is what happens if something happens to me and then her care is left in charge of somebody and they decide to medicate her. And we all know how my kid is with meds. And then she has this reaction she had on the meds. And then they just literally put her to an oblivion just to dull her down. Those are the fears I really worry about. My biggest fear in the whole world is her wondering where I am, where am I? So I will always say to her, if you miss mama, where am I? And she'll say, in my body. And then she'll say heart, because I always have to correct her. So I'm trying to tell her that I'm always in your heart. If you ever miss mama, where am I? In my body, heart. She corrects herself. It's like those little tidbits of she brought up my mom's dog today, Toby. Toby died. I said, yeah, Toby went to heaven. Everybody dies and goes to heaven. So you'll see them, I'm trying to which doesn't mean anything to her, but it's but that's a big fear. That's my number one.
I had a conversation with my oldest sister one time and I just really talked about, oh, I'm gonna cry. Just this whole idea. I'm like, if something happened to me and my husband, I'm really worried that he would just end up in like a group home or something. And she's like, oh, we would never allow that to happen. You know, I am fortunate to have a lot of siblings, but I'm like, you guys don't know where your lives are going to be at, like Kimmy was talking about. And also, like, I can't even, and like, as much as I try to write everything out, I've done like a letter of intent and all that stuff. It doesn't like describe all the little everyday things that you have to do to help him or to like help
Right.
regulate him. And if you don't know how to regulate him and you try to come at him like with like certain attitudes or certain like ways of doing things that may feel right or seem like you're supposed to do, it could lead him to be very explosive, unregulated, and then you're going to feel like, I mean, I didn't say this, but like someone could feel like they couldn't handle that and then be like, okay, well, this is the other option, either to push him around from person to person, which isn't going to help, or that he ends up in some sort of group home, like not protected. And it's just like, there's no guarantees when we die. And like, as much as you try to prepare for that, and I feel guilty that I wasn't like didn't save up a ton of money before I had children, because now I'm like, I can't guarantee his safety in any way, even with money. It's like so many balls in the air, and it's really, really hard because you want what's
Yeah.
best for your kids when you pass, and you can't control it. Like, you can't control it when you're gone, as much as you try to sell it for yourself up, or and as much as you trust this. Like, if someone in my family did have to resort to like a group home or another type of situation, I bet they tried the best they could, but it wasn't me, or it wasn't my husband. Like, it's just, we can't be here forever, and it sucks.
I do need to do a letter of intent. I can't bring myself to do it. I do need to finish it. My sister-in-law is always on me about doing a will. She's like, you have to have it in writing. If it, she's a legal secretary. She's like, if anything happens, like, let's just say, like, she would have, like, the ministry would take her until we get it all figured out. Like, you got to get this stuff. You just have to be prepared. And after our dad died, I remember we were having some drinks, and my brother and I were in the kitchen, and I just started crying into my kid. And he's like, I know. He like didn't even let me finish. He's like, Christy and I talked about it, Jen. We will take her. And that's so easy to say, but like, could you? Because one of you wouldn't be able to work. Like, that's kind of the reality. It's like, and I think that's another fear we have with our children is it's not like a kid could just slide into a family. And I'm not saying a neurotypical kid would. I'm just talking about the understanding part of it, right? And the extraordinary needs that come with our children, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't know how my sister-in-law would be able to go to work if she had my kid. And then like Jaime said, they've exhausted trying to make it work, but like, what if it doesn't work? What are they going to do? You know what I mean? Their whole lives would change. Like, they didn't plan to have a kid forever. And that's, I'm of course going to the worst case scenario, but those are just fears that,
Well, I think, like I said earlier,
think about.
What if you die when you're 80?
Yeah.
Like, what's the age difference between you and your brother or you and your siblings? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, and that's the other thing. Like, and I say this, and I say this off the cuff, and please know it. I want Kaya to die before me, a day before me. Like, I don't want her to be in this world and wonder where I am. Paralyzes me every day. The thought of it. It's just
no, it's so
something that
scary, and it's so
people will
overwhelming.
never understand until they have a child like ours that doesn't actually understand.
Well, and we know the huge amount of work and like sacrifice it takes to raise children like ours. Like, and I hate to say it like that. I'm not saying that she's a burden, but there's a lot of things that we're not able to do because
we've developed a skill set over our kids' entire lifetime. To drop that expectation into somebody else. I mean, that's assuming that they know how to make toast and put it on the right colored plate at the beginning of the day. I mean, it is so many facets and parts. I don't know. To me,
and it's just hard to even have a day like the other day. I was like, oh, everybody's gone. I'm just gonna be able to relax today. And that wasn't the way that Alyssa was not jiving with that. And she's a pain in the ass all day. And I know that's a small thing. She's my kid, whatever. It comes with the territory, but like that I think would be hard for other people to really take on at 100% in the middle of their life. Like, not, I raised her and I've always had her, so we're used to that. So it's just like, that's just a part of our life. But then to transfer that to somebody else, and my kids who have dealt with this their whole life, they were born into it, except for my son. He obviously he's older than her. So it's like, to have this their whole life and then to take it on as an adult, like, I don't know, sometimes it makes me like wonder if that's the right thing too.
Yeah.
But I'm like, there's three of them. One of them better be able to figure it out. Or hopefully they can all like kind of divide and conquer between
Work
the three of
together.
them is, what I selfishly hope. Because I can't fathom when I used to see my mother in the nursing home, they'd always be like these people that were younger that you wouldn't typically think to be in a nursing home. And not super young, they might be 40 or 50, clearly had special needs. They're just sitting in a room staring at them.
They have no family
That
and nowhere. Yeah.
No one's there. Yeah.
every freaking time. I mean, it was hard enough to see my mother who had dementia and was declining, and that was horrible. But then when I got to, down the hall to see that guy or that lady, and I could just picture Alyssa, I never want that to be her. I never want
Mhm.
her stuck in a room staring at a wall with nobody to talk to. It's,
Same.
I can't even
Same.
describe how bad it messed me up every time I went there, going from my mother. And there was just like a weird parallel with her and Alyssa when my mother had Alzheimer's that you could really just see like a parallel with like the way my mother's processing was going and stuff like that. And obviously it's very different, but when I did go by and see these people that like you could tell they had special needs, you could tell that they didn't belong in a nursing home, they weren't sick, this is just where they landed for whatever reason. They probably had some kind of medical thing to be able to like be established there, but it wasn't like, something terminal or anything like that. And they're just left there and they're just sitting and people don't come to visit them. And it's just awful.
Yeah. And I think like for Jesse in a different way, and like he'll probably be capable of doing certain things on his own. And to other people be like, oh, well, Jesse can just do that. Like we can get him a little job, or like, I don't know, like maybe he'll appear as if he could live on his own or something like that. But, and I don't want to underestimate a child in any way, but then how do you explain to someone, be like, no, actually he couldn't, because if anything goes wrong, he couldn't handle that situation. And so I don't know, because I feel like people are always going to look for like the best case scenario for everyone. And they're going to be like, oh, well, we can put him in this home with these other guys. I don't know, just all these crazy, I've thought through so many different things that could happen when he's an adult, because it's like, yeah, but what if he's walking down the street one day and there's like some sort of emergency, and then he ends up in like some crazy situation, and then people think that he is a perpetrator of something, just stuff like that, where it's like really trying to explain, like my letter of intent right now, which I need to update, and we don't have a will and stuff like that we need to do, but it's like in there, it's so detailed. It's like, it may appear like this, but just remember this and this and this could happen. Like it's so like intense of like, I don't know. I feel like Rach can relate a little bit, because like with Celie, I think a lot of time people think she's like capable of a lot. And I'm not saying our kids aren't capable of a lot, but there's certain things that can like
But
definitely be
they still
slippery.
need a supportive environment.
Yes.
Even if they're able to be independent, which obviously hopefully is the goal, most likely they will not be able to do it without a lot of support.
Yeah, it's pretty daunting stuff. So I always say if you don't have a child in that situation, be thankful, It's a
Yeah,
hard,
and
it's a
just the
heavy
fact that
weight to carry, that worry
you
for your kid. And I know all parents worry, so please know I'm not saying one worry is over there. They're just different.
it's different.
It's
Yeah.
just
And
different.
I mean, we have to go to court and get guardianship over our children when they turn 18. Like,
I don't want to do that.
you know what I mean? It's just something again that I mean, that I thought that was the stupidest thing I ever heard. I mean, I heard of it so long ago. So I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah. And the courts can swoop in and they can make decisions for your children, and it can be a whole mess if you don't get it straightened. And then you can have kids that are higher functioning that still could really be taken advantage of. So like if you weren't able to do that, then that leaves them very vulnerable. Like it's just there's all this stuff to it.
All
It's just
right.
like all these extra things that you have to navigate. It's not
Mm.
even that it's a big deal to do guardianship. We had zero issues. She didn't even have to go to court. So it was just
But you're lucky
daunting.
because Carrie Cariello, she talked about Jack's guardianship and they had to go to court and how she was worried that he like they ask you, like
Mhm.
unpredictable what he might say. She's like, I was worried he
Yeah.
might shout no. Like,
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
I
yeah.
worry about.
right? Like you just don't know what our kids are gonna say.
Well, and
So
it's also like that same thing too. I have fears about like already Jesse, because he watches a stupid cartoon called Loud House. He has a little friend at school and church, and he was hugging her the other day, and he's like, "Oh, that's my girlfriend." And I was like, "No, that's not your girlfriend." Like she's just like hugging him because he's a boy she knows at school and church. But in his mind, he's like, "Oh, she's a girl. I like her," not even in that way. He's 9 years old, but like as a friend, he's like, "So that's my girlfriend." And he goes, "I'm gonna kiss her we're going to kiss or something like that. And I said, no, you're not. You don't kiss girls. And I was like, and if you do ever kiss a girl, she has to say it's okay. Like all these things, like I thought about that stuff, but I didn't really think about till that moment that my son doesn't understand interpersonal relationships. And
Yeah.
and he goes, because of this show, he goes, well, you kiss a girl and then she hits you because that's what happens in this show. Like a little boy kisses this girl and she smacks him in the face. And I'm like, no. And especially if a girl's hitting you, that means that it's not welcome. Like she gets to, you have to both decide that you want to do that. But I was like, you are like, and I can say this now because he's 9. It's going to be a lot harder when he's like 15, 16. I'm like, you can't kiss anybody right now, buddy. You can kiss your mother. Okay. But it's just like,
So scary to think about.
as he gets older, that relationship stuff and
Mhm.
and then he wants to get married, and I'm not putting this any of this out of his future, but it's like the heartbreak of like him growing up and realizing that we already go through this already, where people can tell that he's different, and like the heartbreak I have over that stuff, like the rates of like people on the spectrum getting married and having successful relationships are very low. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, that's a fear for me. I don't know if that's necessarily all under the same category, but it's like heartbreaking, I guess, overall, that like he's not going to be able to have those relationships and the meaningful way of other people. And it's like, oh, like.
Well, Jaime, to pivot off of what you said, my daughter loves herself a boy. And so she doesn't understand. Like there was a time in school and they were saying she would just, even, men teachers, she would just have to have to touch them or try to hold their hands. And, I joked about her doing it in the hospital, but she has no boundaries when it comes to asking a man to hold her hand.
And it's a double standard, right? But
right?
I feel like
she doesn't. Yeah.
It's not as problematic for a girl to do it. If that was a boy doing that,
yeah,
it would be a little more
but
off-putting,
that's where that worry is.
Yeah,
like,
but there's so much to
on
lose
it.
too, because then Celie's like, "Oh, you want to be my boyfriend? Let's go in this closet." They'll say like, "Get in my van," and she'll be like, "Bitch, let's go."
Yeah.
She's an agreeable girl if there's some adventure. I mean,
yeah, because it flips. Yeah.
I just want to say, like, I've been trying to formulate my words here, but I know that I'm not alone in saying this. So for me, just talk about that biggest fear, just because I might not be alone here. I don't see another option besides a group home for my daughter. And it's something that I feel is not just me catastrophizing. I feel like my daughter needs more than her dad and I are right now, which is why we have respite every weekend. It's why she's at a school like she is at. It's why she has specific transportation. Like in every setting, the dials need to be so cranked up to support her success. Celie doesn't have other siblings. She doesn't. I have wonderful siblings. I've got extraordinary friends, but the facts of the matter are like jumping into the skill set that we've developed over Celie's lifetime isn't realistic. So for us, it's like continue to work on acceptance of her being in a setting like that and work through the fears that I have in a fundamental way with the team that's there that oversees, because it's not like she's at a group home and somebody will come visit her and notice that something is not being handled properly, whether it's dignity stuff like her shirt is dirty or she doesn't go on enough outings or there isn't an activity going or the fence is open or whatever. I don't know. For me, all of our vulnerabilities are within the variables of our life. And considering that all of the dials need to be ratcheted up to support our family, even when Billy and I are involved, is daunting. And like, people can see that she's this resilient girl, but that resilience has grown through events that could bring serious consequences or have. And there's trauma in that. And it's like my job to manage what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And will anybody know and understand at that level? Because
and what safe options do you have?
Right.
The other
like
thing,
there are parts of Celie that with regard to autism and many of the idiosyncrasies within her different diagnoses are like, we've built skills. She has grown in many ways. But there are other things that aren't growing, won't grow, have not changed. And she can hide that to an extent, but like Jamie's saying, it just ruptures. It just like her overwhelm reveals itself for Seely in aggression and this big explosive thing. And if that happens on the Target or the street side or at a group home or whatever, is the answer going to be to take away more of her rights or medicate her more or whatever? Who's still there? You know, who's there? I could pick a ton of my friends. We all, like, as many of our listeners know, I live in Minnesota. I've got a shit ton of incredible families that I'm raising my daughter next to. Those moms are as old and as tired as I am. There's not I mean, Christ, I'm going to have every Lindsay in my life. Like, I get all the Lindsay kids. There's I don't know. I gotta build a group home, people. The Flanaverse is coming. I'm pro group home because I can't see another way. And my daughter needs stimulation, like she's on a goddamn cruise ship. And let's talk about another girl that needs a water ordered at the right temperature. I got one of those. We need butler service at the group home, please.
And I just think it's hard too, because it really makes you analyze the people in your life. And I think I'm very fortunate in our life that a lot of my siblings and our family and stuff have been around people who have differences, or they've just been through harder things in their lives, so that they can at least think outside the box in some ways. But some people I think about, and it's just I don't think they could handle it. And I would have said that about myself before I had my child, but I've progressed up to where I am from having my child, where it's
yes,
man, I don't know if you could think outside the box of what it means that his brain works differently. I don't know if you could fully accept what that means. And maybe that's me downing people, and people could get to that place, but some people they just see the world in such a black and white way that I'm I don't know if I could have you do that. And I think with the group home thing too, I think I have a uncle who I've never known really well. I've only met him a couple times, but he has a disability that he's had his whole life, and he's ended up in a group home type situation for decades, and it's been a good thing. But it's okay, how do I find a good one, or who do I trust to make sure that stuff's okay? And again, that's where we're man, I wish I was a billionaire, because then I could
well,
make
that's the thing.
sure
It's
that
they just don't have enough staff for these group homes, especially here in Massachusetts. They cannot keep them staffed, so they have to take shitty people, because that's the only people that are available, so that they have to take them, and the qualifications that you need to work in a group home aren't that high. You don't need that much qualifications. It's nothing like what you get through the school system. Nothing like that. It's scary. And there's so much abuse, and it's really bad.
I don't know. I always say if I could start some sort of nonprofit or something, it'd be supporting the caregiver work system and making it a desirable career for people, because you can't get benefits. They don't pay enough, all that crap. It's just, it's
And it's like that one person who's the head case manager or whatever, they can get okay pay and okay benefits, and all the other people that are doing the direct care can't. It's not to say that everybody that works in this is bad. There's lots of great people that are in these positions, but they just can't. The need is so much higher than what's able to be provided. And especially when you're talking about adults with significant disabilities who can't communicate what's going on. I mean, nobody knows, so they just get away with doing bare minimum, and they're overwhelmed and they're overworked, and it's hard when you have a kid in a group home that you're not usually the easiest. I mean, an adult kid, they're not usually they're there for a reason. They're there because they can't be managed at home, and it's not the easiest. And you're dealing with aggression, and you could be dealing with elopement, and it's they're also dealing with a lot, and they're not really supported. So it's a no-win situation.
Well, Rach knows that from looking and finding nothing that would be sufficient for Seely's needs.
And we've run into that. But I also I just want to say out loud that I have some friends that have really cool placements for their children, for their kids. And residential is not this choice that you're wanting to make. Residential is a place that you come to on a journey that you can't get resourced enough for some of our kids. And I think it's life-saving for many, many, many families. And I'm sure that all of them that are in a placement like Jess Berger or my friend Gina, or so many families, it's thank your lucky stars that you found a great place.
I was gonna say, it's finding this kind of
and having an
it's
involved parent is a big, huge thing too. Like a lot of these people don't have involved parents. They're
But you
put in
know,
these places.
just to like scream from the rooftops that placements are possible, and teams are incredible sometimes. Like the place where my husband works, they have 32 group homes within their network, and they're all staffed, they're clean. I mean, it's my dream that Celie can find really bomb ass roommates at like really avant-garde makeup, because there really is cool homes. And I'll tell you, one of my closest friends who we've had like this very tumultuous but parallel timeline with our kids, and like sort of facing big shit on the same day kind of deal. Her son's group home is, I believe, maybe 6 families. Of them, 4 are very, very involved, and
Mhm.
each considers themselves to have each of those 6 kids.
I think
And
that makes a huge difference. So when parents are able to advocate and be involved, like
yeah,
that's not the case for every person that's in a group home. You know, you have a lot of these people have parents who have passed away or are
and in
elderly,
that
can
way, I guess
care for them, you know.
my goal
That's
would be
where I
that I
think
get to care for the
that's what
kids that are within Celie's, and hope that there's a mom behind me that'll
Mhm.
care for her when I'm gone within that same family circle, you know?
I think that just makes them, that clientele, just that much more vulnerable, you know.
Mhm.
Well, and it's just like, when we had Jessica Burr on, and just like how hard she had to fight to get the money to help. These places are so expensive too. Like
Mhm.
it's so hard. And like I just wish that we supported that more as a community. And
Mm-hmm.
and again, like the people who there are amazing people who are caregivers, and like you
Yes.
meet some of these people who've literally sacrificed huge things in their lives just because they love helping people, and they're getting paid less than they should and all this different stuff. But man, it's like, why can't we as a society, like, what is it, like 1 in 4 people or something eventually needs a caregiver in their life? It's like we need to be supporting this
I'll
more.
tell
Anyway,
you,
I keep
just to
ranting
put
about
like
that.
a figure to that statement, James, when I was facing that like group home option for C, it would have been hundreds upon hundreds of dollars a day for her to be there. I'm talking $1,500 a day billed to her, whatever. The opposite of that is that someone who was highly skilled, as you guys know, is the place that she landed. That person through another system got $61 per day that my daughter was there. What the F is that? I mean, that's like not valuing any of it. It's just despicable. I mean, it's like there's a lot of cracks to fall through.
Yep.
Yeah, and then it's like it depends where you live and what the legislation is and what the laws are, and you know, there's so many differences. It's just a place that in a lot of areas they fall through the cracks of how they're monitored. And same thing with nursing homes. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but same thing happens with nursing homes. It's vulnerable people. They don't have enough staff. They don't have enough people to take care of all these people. So like of course they're not going to get the best care even when there's good people,
Well, I mean, I
because you
think
have one
about,
person doing all this stuff.
yeah, it's wow. So there's lots of fears wrapped up into current and ongoing, and then
Yes,
the
yes.
afterlife.
Really positive episode.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah,
you know
and
what?
like
This
It
personally,
is
was
not the
called
one that
fear.
you need to listen to if you're having a hard day. It's not
yeah,
the pick me upper.
and it's just for me, I try not to dwell on a lot of these things that are out of my control, because they're gonna
And I can't
happen or
help
they're
it. They
not gonna happen
consumes
either
me.
way. So I try not to think
Consumes
about
me.
it daily. You know, I try to give the benefit of the doubt, and I try to think positive and control what I can control. But then sometimes you get in those little funks and those little days where you can't help but to think about it. And it's scary. And it's scary when you don't have as many people that can step in. That's even scarier. It's scarier when there's no siblings around. I mean, there's just,
Mhm.
the ball can keep rolling and rolling and rolling.
And like I said, it consumes me daily, and maybe I would have some comfort if I did a will and I knew that, and I did my letter of intent, not that, but I gotta show these people how to cut her eggs. Okay. It's really important. So
Well, no, you got people that are out there that starting their own homes for their children. You know, there's people that are going around
I
some of
will
this
tell
stuff,
you
and
though, there is this thing that happened where institutions closed. Institutions that our children were in, institutions closed, and then the reforming bills that changed all of that, that closed those down, were, in my view, Rachel Flanagan, Celie's mom, they were written in such a way that would mean that Kate Swenson and I can't build a friggin' group home because we fundraised and whatever, because you can't, like, it would be under the restraints from the taking apart the institutions, sort of like, I don't know what the word would be, but it like makes it more challenging to have options to build something now. I can't develop an apartment building, but I could figure out the loopholes like a resilient special needs mom and buy a townhouse that 4 of our kids live in. But like, you can't do stuff in an official way to make change for many families. Now you can just solve problems in groups of 4,
Yeah.
because you have to. I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy, people.
Mm-mm.
Well,
So if you've
that's our
lasted this
episode.
long without falling off
what's
the
one
cliff,
last
we
thing?
appreciate it.
This is our episode on fears. Thank you for joining us on our doom and gloom fall down the rabbit hole.
Next time we'll be more positive. We're going to talk about the joys next time. So
Yes, next time
come back.
we're gonna flip the script. Anybody have one last thing that they want to talk about?
I finished my hang on, what's it called? Rebel Rising book. Extraordinary. I also finished this book that Jaime talked to me about. Jane, what's that book? Alice?
Alice, I have been.
Oh my God, you guys. I'm thinking we have got to be starting a book club over here. Maybe that's my one last
I
thing.
would agree, although I have a book club that I already help run, and the book club's in 2 days, and I have not read the books.
Well, we could rate
I heard it
and
wasn't
use
that good,
books
Jaime.
that you love.
Yeah, apparently it's not that good, and I have to read it because I have to run it. But I do love a book. I do love it. I will do it with you, Rach. If you want to do a book club, I will do it.
Anyways, Alice, what's it called?
It's called Alice, I Have Been. It came out, I mean, a lot of years ago now, but it's by Melanie Benjamin. I love her as a historical fiction author. But I love that book because I've always been obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, and this book will kind of ruin that for you, but it's a really good book.
Yes, it will. Yes. Enjoy, people. Let us know
I
if you like
completely
it.
forgot what I was going to say.
I can do mine. One last thing negative. I had a migraine for a week. That sucked. But we did have a day off today because it is a holiday in Massachusetts. So I had a long weekend. So that was good. And I have 3 chapters left in my book that I'm writing.
Well, we're down to 3.
Yee-hoo!
Kimmy's going to round it off an even 100.
I'm on chapter 61 right now.
So really,
I just finished chapter 61.
That's amazing.
That's exciting.
Well, mine's not crazy, except I watched the Kelsey documentary. It was so good. I love him, but I love his wife. I love how involved she is with the Eagles Autism Foundation. But I just love Jason Kelsey. I love that guy. I love him with his daughters. Did you guys watch the documentary? Daddy, you didn't win. Uncle Travi wind. Like, it was just really cute. So this big giant man with these little teeny tiny girls. Yeah, it's pretty cool. That's my one last thing. Watch the Kelsey documentary. It's cute. I cried through it, but it's also that time of the month. So I was like sobbing 5 minutes into it.
My one last thing is, oh my gosh, you guys, I have nothing positive to say, and I don't want to say anything negative.
The subscriber page, that's positive.
Oh yeah, I have a subscriber page now for my blog page. I am excited to have one because I'm a little less free on the internet because I don't know, I get weird when I put out a live or something and then there's like just random people who aren't my followers I don't recognize like on there. And so now I feel like I have a safe place to do that, which is nice. We went and saw the new Ghostbusters movie. My family are very big Ghostbusters fans, and I have to say,
Is it 3D?
I don't know if they have a 3D version. I don't go see the 3D because I get motion sickness from it, but it was really cute and I like it. That's my one last thing. Not too exciting over here.
Love it.
Trying to be positive, people, and it's really hard.
Maybe get at us next week.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
And now we're talking about the sparkling parts.
Yeah, join us next time for joy.
Enjoy. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Talk Like a Mother Parenting Autism podcast. If you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. And if you'd like to support us, you can become a subscriber. Just check out the description of this episode. Give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram for more content, and we'll see you next time.